Her body was cut perfectly in half and drained of every drop of blood. Tonight, you'll learn why this 1947 Hollywood murder still haunts detectives 77 years later. And by minute 17, you'll meet the suspect the FBI quietly believed did it. January 15th, 1947, Los Angeles. A cold, gray morning in the Leimert Park neighborhood. A young mother named Betty Bersinger is walking her 3-year-old daughter down South Norton Avenue, heading toward a shoe repair shop. The lots on either side of the street are empty, overgrown with weeds, waiting for the post-war housing boom to fill them in. As she passes one of those lots, she glances to her right, and what she sees on the grass just a few feet from the sidewalk freezes her in place. At first, she thinks it's a mannequin, a discarded department store dummy, pale and broken, tossed into the weeds. But mannequins don't have hair. Mannequins don't have human teeth fixed in a frozen, impossible smile. And mannequins are not severed cleanly in half at the waist. Betty Bersinger runs to the nearest house and calls the police. Within the hour, the corner of 39th and Norton becomes the most photographed crime scene in American history. And the woman lying in that empty lot becomes a legend, a ghost, a wound that Hollywood has never been able to close. Her name was Elizabeth Short. The newspapers would call her the Black Dahlia, and her killer has never been found. Tonight we go back to that lot. We trace her final week, hour by hour. We examine the suspects, the confessions, the buried evidence, and the surgical precision of a wound that pointed straight at someone with medical training. Because this is not just an unsolved case. This is the case that taught America how dark Hollywood could really be. Elizabeth Short was 22 years old. She was born on July 29, 1924, in Boston, Massachusetts, the third of 5 daughters in a family that would soon fracture. Her father, Cleo Short, was a builder of miniature golf courses. In 1930, when the Depression destroyed his business, Cleo left his car parked on a bridge near Charlestown, faked his own suicide, and vanished. Elizabeth's mother, Phoebe, raised the 5 girls alone, scraping by on welfare checks in the working-class town of Medford. Years later, when Elizabeth was a teenager, a letter arrived. Cleo was alive. He was living in California. He apologized, he begged forgiveness, and he wanted to reconnect. Phoebe refused. But Elizabeth, who had grown up worshiping the ghost of a father she barely remembered, said yes. In 1943, she traveled west to live with him in Vallejo, just north of San Francisco. The reunion was a disaster. Cleo was controlling, critical, demanding. Elizabeth was dreamy, restless, addicted to movie magazines and the idea of stardom. Within months, they were fighting constantly, and Cleo threw her out. She drifted south, worked briefly as a cashier at Camp Cook, an army base near Lompoc, and began a pattern that would define the rest of her short life. She moved constantly. She slept on couches. She borrowed money. She dated soldiers, sailors, businessmen, anyone who would buy her dinner and let her dream out loud about Hollywood. She was strikingly beautiful. Pale skin, jet black hair, blue-green eyes, and a habit of wearing all black, head to toe. Some of her friends would later say the nickname Black Dahlia came from a Long Beach drugstore where the staff teased her about her dark clothes, riffing on the 1946 film noir The Blue Dahlia. Others said the press invented it after her death. The truth is somewhere in between, but the name stuck because it was perfect. She looked like a noir heroine. She would die like one too. In September 1945, she got engaged to a young Air Force pilot named Major Matthew Gordon Jr. She told her friends he was the love of her life. Weeks later, he died in a plane crash in India. Elizabeth carried his photograph in her purse for the rest of her life. Some who knew her said she was never the same after Gordon's death. She drank more. She drifted further. She told elaborate, contradictory stories about her past, about secret marriages, about babies she had lost. Almost none of it was true. By the summer of 1946, she was living in Los Angeles, sharing crowded apartments with other aspiring actresses, sleeping wherever she could. She had no film credits, no agent, no real prospects. But she had a face, and in Hollywood that was almost enough. Almost. On January 9, 1947, she was last seen alive at the Biltmore Hotel in downtown Los Angeles. She had spent the previous week in San Diego, staying with a family she had only just met, and had been driven back to LA by a married salesman named Robert Manley, known as Red. Red dropped her at the Biltmore that evening. She told him she was waiting to meet her sister. There was no sister coming. Surveillance, if you can call it that, in 1947 ended at the Biltmore lobby. She was seen using the lobby phone. She was seen walking out the front door, alone, just after 10 p.m., and then she vanished. For 6 days, no one knows where Elizabeth Short was. 6 days of silence between the Biltmore and that empty lot on Norton Avenue. When her body was discovered on the morning of January 15th, the wounds told a story so disturbing that police initially refused to release the details. She had been bisected at the waist, severed cleanly between the second and third lumbar vertebrae. The cut was so precise that the coroner believed it had been done with a procedure called a hemicorporectomy, a surgical separation taught in medical schools at the time. This was not the work of a panicked killer with a saw. This was someone who knew anatomy. Her body had been completely drained of blood, washed, scrubbed, posed deliberately, arms raised above her head, legs spread, the two halves placed about 10 inches apart. There were rope marks on her wrists, ankles, and neck, suggesting she had been bound and tortured for hours, possibly days, before death. Her face had been slashed from the corners of her mouth to her ears, creating what investigators called a Glasgow smile, a permanent grin carved into her flesh. The cause of death was hemorrhaging from the facial lacerations and blunt force trauma to the head. Whoever killed Elizabeth Short had taken his time. He had a space to work in. He had tools, water, and most likely, training. And then he had transported her in 2 pieces and arranged her in a vacant lot at dawn in a residential neighborhood with the confidence of a man who knew he would not be caught. The Los Angeles Examiner received a phone call the next day. A man with a calm voice congratulated the editor on the coverage and said he would send along some of Elizabeth's belongings because, as he put it, the case was getting a little stale. 9 days later, a manila envelope arrived at the paper. Inside were Elizabeth Short's birth certificate, her social security card, photographs, business cards, and an address book with the name Mark Hansen embossed on the cover. Several pages had been torn out. The envelope had been wiped clean with gasoline. No fingerprints, no return address. The killer was taunting the press. And the press, hungry for sales in a brutal newspaper war between the Examiner and the Times, gave him exactly what he wanted. Front page after front page. The Black Dahlia. A nickname so cinematic it almost made you forget there was a real young woman beneath it. The investigation that followed was, by any modern standard, a catastrophe. The LAPD assigned over 50 detectives to the case. They interviewed more than 150 suspects. They received more than 500 confessions, almost all of them from cranks, drunks, and people seeking attention. Reporters from the Examiner literally raced detectives to crime scenes, sometimes arriving first, contaminating evidence, interviewing witnesses before police could, and in at least one case, hiding Elizabeth's mother in a hotel room to keep rival papers away from her. Let's talk about the suspects. Because over 77 years, the list has grown long, and several names keep rising to the top. First, Robert "Red" Manley, the salesman who drove Elizabeth from San Diego back to Los Angeles. He was the last confirmed person to see her alive. Police grilled him for hours. He passed 2 polygraph tests. His alibi for the days she was missing held up. He was cleared, though the experience destroyed him. He suffered a nervous breakdown years later and was committed to a psychiatric hospital, where he died in 1986. Most modern investigators agree Red Manley was not the killer. Second, Mark Hansen, the owner of a Hollywood nightclub called the Florentine Gardens. Elizabeth had lived in his house for a time, along with several other young women. His name was on the address book mailed to the Examiner. He had reportedly made romantic advances toward Elizabeth that she rejected. Police investigated him aggressively, but found no physical evidence linking him to the murder. He was eventually cleared, though some researchers still find his proximity to Elizabeth and the missing pages of the address book deeply suspicious. Third, Leslie Dillon, a bellhop and aspiring writer who contacted a police psychiatrist offering insights into the case. The more he talked, the more he seemed to know. Detectives became convinced he was involved. They held him for weeks, transported him across state lines, and questioned him relentlessly. But again, no physical evidence. Dillon sued the LAPD for false imprisonment and won a settlement. He was cleared, though doubts about him have lingered for decades. Fourth, and most famously, Dr. George Hodel. And this is where the case takes a turn that even Hollywood would not dare to script. George Hodel was a wealthy, well-connected Los Angeles physician who specialized in venereal disease. He owned a Frank Lloyd Wright-designed mansion called the Soden House in the Los Feliz neighborhood. He moved in elite circles. He was friends with the surrealist photographer Man Ray. He had a reputation for parties, for drugs, for cruelty, and for an unsettling interest in young women. In 1949, 2 years after the Black Dahlia murder, his own daughter Tamar accused him of incest. He was acquitted at trial, but the LAPD never forgot the case. In fact, the LAPD secretly investigated George Hodel as a primary suspect in the Black Dahlia murder. We know this because in 2003, the LAPD released a file containing surveillance transcripts. In February 1950, detectives planted listening devices inside Hodel's home. For weeks, they recorded his conversations. And on one of those tapes, George Hodel is heard saying, quote, "Supposing I did kill the Black Dahlia. They can't prove it now. They can't talk to my secretary anymore because she's dead." End quote. That is not a confession in court, but it is a chilling statement on a police wiretap. And it is the closest thing this case has ever had to a smoking gun. George Hodel fled the United States shortly after the wiretap, moving first to Hawaii and then to the Philippines, where he lived for decades. He died in 1999. After his death, his own son, a retired LAPD homicide detective named Steve Hodel, began investigating his father. Steve Hodel wrote a book called Black Dahlia Avenger, in which he laid out a case that his father had not only murdered Elizabeth Short, but possibly several other women as well. He pointed to handwriting comparisons, photographs found in his father's possession that resembled Elizabeth, his father's surgical training, and that wiretap. The Los Angeles District Attorney's Office, after reviewing Steve Hodel's evidence, acknowledged that if George Hodel were alive today, they would likely have enough to charge him. But George Hodel is dead, and the case file remains officially open. There are other theories. Some researchers have pointed to Walter Bailey, a surgeon whose former home was just 1 block from where Elizabeth's body was found. Others have suggested Jack Anderson Wilson, a drifter and ex-convict who confessed to a journalist before dying in a hotel fire in 1982. Some have even proposed that the killing was the work of more than one person, a conspiracy of Hollywood insiders protecting a powerful figure. But the truth is, we do not know. 77 years later, the case remains unsolved. The original evidence, including the rope, the cement bag her body was reportedly transported in, and items from her purse, has been lost, degraded, or destroyed. There is no DNA to test. There is no fingerprint to match. There is only the memory of a young woman who came to Hollywood chasing a dream, and the silence of a city that may have always known who killed her. Let me read you something. It is from a letter Elizabeth wrote to her mother in 1946, just months before her death. She wrote, "I'm going to be in pictures soon, Mama. You will see my name. I promise you will see my name. She was right. The whole world saw her name, just not the way she meant." Elizabeth Short is buried in Mountain View Cemetery in Oakland, California. Her grave is small, simple, and almost always covered in flowers left by strangers. People still visit. 77 years after a 6-year-old girl stumbled past her body in an empty lot, people still come to remember her. The Black Dahlia case changed American crime reporting forever. It created the template for the modern true crime obsession, the cinematic killer, the beautiful victim, the city of dark glamour hiding monsters in plain sight. It inspired novels by James Ellroy, films by Brian De Palma, countless documentaries, podcasts, and books. But underneath all the mythology, there is still a young woman with a slashed smile lying in the weeds, and there is still someone, somewhere in the long shadow of Los Angeles, who got away with it. When you think about what happened to Elizabeth Short, ask yourself this. How many other Elizabeths were there in 1947 Hollywood? How many young women arrived at Union Station with a suitcase and a dream and were swallowed by a city that did not care if they lived or died? The Black Dahlia is famous because her body was staged for the cameras. But the truth is, she was not unique. She was a warning, and we never quite learned to listen. If this case haunted you the way it haunts me, subscribe to Dark Cases. Every week, we open another file the world tried to forget. Hit the bell, leave a comment with your theory, and stay with us. Because somewhere out there, another empty lot is still waiting to give up its secrets.